Revelation chapter 6 is where we were up to, I believe. And yes, we're going to do the last of the opening of the four seals and the last horseman, horseman of the apocalypse, traditionally they're known as. Things are going to change a little bit after this. So do you remember the seven seals? So we're coming to the end of the fourth one now, which leaves three. You're impressed with my maths skills, but it kind of changes a bit after this. But anyway, we're going to just do verses 7 and 8, which I shall read out to you. So Revelation 6 verse 7. And when he had opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth beast say, Come and see. And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed with him. And power was given unto them over the fourth part of the earth, to kill with sword, and with hunger, and with death, and with the beasts of the earth. Okay, so just to kind of recap a little bit, I don't want to recap too much, but just on the various developments that we've seen in the book of Revelation so far, because I think sometimes when you think about Revelation, you think, well, it's just this kind of bewildering, kind of kaleidoscope of images and that are sort of so puzzling, and well, there is actually quite a sensible sort of order to things, and that's why I've been taking them just a little bit at a time, because it can get overwhelming. If I just gave you all the four horsemen in one teaching session and then tried to explain to you what they all meant, it would be just like, oh, wait, what? So this is why I've kind of really chopped it down into mainly two verses, because it seemed the right way to do it. But anyway, there is an order and there is a development in the book of Revelation. So just to recap, Christ appears to John and instructs him to write down the vision. That's in chapter 1, verses 9 to 20. Then we get the letters to the seven churches, which is mainly from chapter 2, verse 1 through to 3, verse 22. Then we get the opening of the door in heaven and the throne of heaven, which is chapter 4, verses 1 to 11. Then we get the approach of the Lamb to the throne, who's going to open the seven seals and the scrolls, and that's chapter 5, verses 1 to 11. And now, of course, we're seeing the content of those seals and those scrolls, which started in chapter 6, verse 1, and is where we're up to tonight. So that's just a brief recap to show you what we're looking at here, and how it's developed, Christ appearing, the churches, and then looking up into heaven, and now looking at the earth where these horsemen are going out, and the symbolism. So now we have the pale horse, which is fitting because for the first time the rider of the horse is named, and he is Death. And now the first of the three seals, each one revealed, the first three seals rather, each one revealed a horse and a rider, and they've been dealing with people that are living, yes, or living at that time. But now the Word of God is kind of taking us in our imagination to the very edge of life, and sort of what exists beyond death. And that's what's going to, the next three seals, that's really what we're going to be dealing with. We're going to be dealing what lies beyond this life on this earth. And so it probably is quite fitting that this rider of the pale horse is named. And so one of the things that follows death is hell, right? But more correctly, probably Hades, and some people, Hades is death's attendant here, and so the idea is that Hades, this is a personification. They use it in poetry, right? The sun has got his hat on, and that's not really a poem, but the sun doesn't have a hat, it's not a person. But here, death is being referred to as if it's a person, and hell is also being referred to as if it were a person. And the idea is that hell or Hades is ready to gather up the slain, the dead. So it's the idea is that lots of people are dying, lots of people are being killed, and following behind is hell, it's Hades gathering up those people, and this is a kind of translational not issue but point of consideration. So like some people will say, well, it shouldn't say hell, it should say, the correct translation is Hades. But Hades isn't actually a translation. That's what it says in the original Greek language. So if you have a modern translation of the Bible, it might say Hades, which is fine, but it's not a translation. They've just left the word untranslated. So when the King James uses the word hell, in our minds we think of a place of punishment for wicked people. It can sometimes mean that, yes. But in this context, I don't believe it actually means that. If you looked up the word in a Greek sort of to English lexicon, the word hell or Hades simply means the place of departed souls, or literally the unseen world. So it's this idea that you die and then you go to this kind of unseen world. So again, we've got to kind of watch out for that, and context will tell you, you know what I mean. So and more of that in a minute. But this idea of death being followed by Hades, some have speculated that the death that's being prophesied here is from disease, because there's what translators call the 4 sore judgments of God. I'll give you an example of it in Ezekiel 14, which is in the Old Testament. Give you a chance to find that. Ezekiel 14. And verse 21, it has it in other places as well. Verse 21, for thus saith the Lord God, how much more when I send my 4 sore judgments upon Jerusalem, the sword and the famine and the noisome beast and the pestilence, to cut off from it man and beast. So there you have them, the sword, famine, beasts, and pestilence, or pestilence is disease. And in some ways, this is quite often what happens when there is warfare, isn't there? When there's war, there's often famine, and because there's famine, people get sick and they die. So it's not really surprised that those 4 things come together. But it could be that that's what's causing so much death, is this pestilence. So we have this kind of Hades or hell, not necessarily a place of punishment in this particular context, and there is what theologians would call, when we take Hades as an example, there is what they call a bad part of Hades and a good part of Hades, which might be a bit of a surprise. And the best way to explain that is in using Jesus' own words. So if you have a look at Luke 16, this is dealing with what happens, you know, after death. So Luke 16. Luke 16 and verse 19. Yes, verse 19. There was a certain rich man, which was clothed in purple and fine linen, and fared sumptuously every day. And there was a certain beggar named Lazarus, which was laid at his gate, full of sores, and desiring to be fed with the crumbs which fell from the rich man's table. Moreover, the dogs came and licked his sores. And it came to pass that the beggar died, and was carried by the angels into Abraham's bosom. And the rich man also died, and was buried. And in hell, or possibly Hades, he lifted up his eyes, being in torments, and seeth Abraham afar off, and Lazarus in his bosom. And he cried and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me. Send Lazarus that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am tormented in this flame. But Abraham said, Son, remember that thou in thy lifetime received thy good things, and likewise Lazarus evil things. And now he is comforted, and thou art tormented. And beside all this, between us and you, there is a great gulf fixed, so that they which would pass from hence to you cannot, neither can they pass to us that would come from thence. So what he's saying is, this Hades, there's a good part to it, Abraham's bosom, it's called here, and there's a bad part to it. And in the middle there's a kind of a gulf, there's a separation which can't be crossed. And so, again, we have an example of the thief on the cross. You remember? Jesus tells the thief on the cross, Verily I say unto thee, today thou shalt be with me in paradise. So there's a place, the good part of Hades, which we might call either Abraham's bosom or paradise. It's somewhere where you'll go and be with Jesus. And this is before the great judgment. Then it will be heaven or hell. But in the meantime, there's this kind of holding place. And I think if I was to describe the bad part of Hades, and I'm not at all trying to trivialize it by this, just trying to really get some understanding of what it's like. It's kind of like death row, like an eternal death row, where there's no reprieve. So John Wesley says that one day each one of us will step out into what he calls unchangeable eternity. So it's like when your life ends, you'll go to one of those two places where you'll wait for the judgment of God, the final judgment. The books are opened, and we'll come to that in Revelation, where the books are opened, and then we find out, right, either you'll be in heaven or you'll be in hell. But that's the reason that I say that when Hades comes as intended, I don't think it is hell, the place of punishment, is because it said, where is it? Power was given unto them, that is death and Hades, over the fourth part of the earth. So that's quite a large part, isn't it, of the earth. And I cannot see that it's only non-Christians that are dying in that, so it has to be a mixture. So that's why I think the context tells me, he's not talking about the place of punishment, he's talking about the place that can be both good and bad. It's this kind of holding place. And that will, again, I will reinforce that idea later on in Revelation by some of the verses that we've got later on in Revelation. So this is, yes, death is coming and is bringing this this destruction, and it's so vast that it's as if Hades is following behind, gathering up those who've died, and finding that place for them. So again, power was given unto them. By who? By God. So God is allowing this, and I've said it before, nothing is happening without either God has caused it, personally, or God may allow it to happen, even if it's something, that's out of the wickedness of men's heart. Yes, God might allow it. Well, how? How can he allow that? That's not just. Well, actually it is, because our life doesn't end at death. And wicked people who die will one day stand in judgment before God. So it's not like, I mean, people point to like, who is it? Jimmy Savile, awful man if you don't know him, and throughout his life, everybody thought he was this wonderful person. And even when he died, he had this kind of tremendous memorial placed in the graveyard, and people giving their tributes to him. Anyway, it emerged after that, didn't it? That he was this awful predator and did some horrendous things. But he hasn't escaped. One day he will stand before God, as we all will, and have to give an account of his life. And so this is why, to kind of think about some of the awful things that happen in the world. God is not the author of that sin, but God may allow it for his own purposes, whatever they are, But that person will be brought to justice. They will be judged, and that's a sobering thought for all of us, isn't it? That one day we'll stand before the judgment throne of God. So in a way, I think that the contents of this, the fourth seal, is really a culmination maybe of the ones that we've had so far. A fourth part of the earth may symbolically represent the Roman Empire. That's what I've been talking about, isn't it? The Emperor Trajan, Roman Empire expanding, and the Christian church being really covered by that empire, in that empire, and therefore affected by it. It will have included those countries where the Christian church has been established. So this is not taking place in China or the Americas. It's taking place in those areas where the Christian church existed, I believe, at that particular time. And so power was given by God to kill, to quote, to kill with the sword and with hunger and with death and with the beasts of the earth. Again, that's a strange one to ponder, isn't it? So the first horseman represented military conquest, particularly Emperor Trajan, and then the rider of the red horse represented extreme bloodshed, and then the black horse represented famine. But what does it mean that death is going to kill with the beasts of the earth? Well, some have suggested that successive wars and famine, bringing depopulation, makes people more susceptible to attacks by wild animals. And I guess in those days was more wild animals than there are now. I don't know if I really go for that. And also the death is supposed to be, if we follow the interpretation that I gave you, death is supposed to be coming out to the north of Patmos, which would be we talked about the Dacian Wars and so on. So could be to do with that. But I'm thinking to myself, well, I wonder if death by the beasts of the earth is not referring to those Christians who had to face wild beasts. I mean, that was one of the trials, wasn't it, that they went through, was they were in particularly in Rome, in the Colosseum and places like that, that they were thrown in with the lions, and with bears and other wild animals and killed by them. So the original verse that we read and that I keep going back to, which is Revelation 1, verse 1, that this is the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave unto him to show to his servants things which must shortly come to pass. So this is to show to his servants, Christians. So it must be things that concern predominantly Christians and his church. And I guess that's one of the trials, that's one of the temptations. Well, if you recant, you won't have to face these wild beasts, these wild animals. You won't have to die at that hand, and that's a real temptation, isn't it? And I think that these are all linked into the letters to the seven churches, where Jesus is preparing his church for the trials and the times of tribulation that are going to come upon them. And that's one of them, to face lions and bears, other wild animals, for the entertainment of wicked emperors. Really was what it was, wasn't it? So I don't know if that it is a little bit difficult to understand. Is this book, and particularly to understand what is meant by Hades, hell. In the 1600s, when the King James Bible was translated, hell had a much broader meaning than it does now. We think, hell is this place of punishment, which it is, but then it included that, but it also just included where, this kind of, I think it's a Saxon word actually, or its origin is from a Saxon word, and it just means that which kind of lies beyond life, that kind of realm where people go after they die, that we don't, it's kind of mysterious, we don't really kind of know what it's like. And so the word would have been used to encompass all of that. But anyway, that's I think that's the best I can explain it anyway. That it depends on the context, and Hades in this case does not necessarily mean that place of punishment. It just simply means that place where both wicked and righteous people are gathered after this life.
Can I make any of these drinks?